Today, we're diving into a really provocative idea from historian Davis Hanson. His thesis? That the Democratic Party we've all known for decades, well, it just doesn't exist anymore. So if it's gone, what took its place? That's the big question we're going to explore.
And there it is, right from the source. This is Hanson's core claim. Now, he's not talking about a little shift to the left or some new branding. He's making the case that the party itself has been fundamentally replaced. And when you make a statement that bold, it leads to one very obvious question.
So, what's the answer? This is the question we're going to unpack for the rest of this explainer. We're going to walk through Hanson's argument, piece by piece, to really understand his take on what the Democratic Party is today.
Okay, so let's get right into his central claim. According to Hanson, the party hasn't just drifted a bit to the left. He argues it has completely transformed into something else entirely, something with very different goals and a whole new ideology.
And you've got to pay attention to the specific words he uses here, socialist and revolutionary. In his view, these aren't just buzzwords. They mean that the party's goal is no longer about, say, reforming the current system. It's about radically restructuring American society from the ground up. So if the party is now revolutionary, what's the belief system that's driving it? Well, according to Hanson, everything revolves around a very specific interpretation of one word: equity.
For Hanson, this is a really critical distinction. He says it's not about giving everyone an equal opportunity to get ahead. Instead, it's about mandating an equality of outcome. And the tool, he says, is used to achieve this: a really aggressive tax system that's designed to move wealth from one group he calls the successful to another he calls the unsuccessful.
So how do you justify that kind of economic model? Well, Hanson argues the party uses what he calls a Marxist binary. He uses that term because he sees society being split into these two opposing groups, a 70% oppressor class and a 30% oppressed class. And this division, he claims, is what underpins the party's entire political strategy.
And this is where, for Hanson, the abstract ideas hit the real world. He connects this ideology directly to specific policies. So in his framework, open borders are presented as a right for the oppressed group. Crime isn't about individual choices, but a consequence of an oppressive society. And high taxes, they become a tool to, in his words, emasculate the successful oppressor class.
Now, to really hammer home just how big of a change he's talking about, Hanson draws this incredibly sharp contrast between the Democratic Party of the not-so-distant past and the party that he sees today.
Just take a look at this comparison he lays out. On one side, you have the 1990s platform, the kind of stuff you'd associate with Bill Clinton. Things like balancing the budget, legal-only immigration, being tough on crime. Then he puts that right up against what he sees as today's platform: massive entitlement spending, open borders, and a view on crime that he says is shaped by critical legal theory, the idea that the legal system itself is a source of oppression. The contrast he's drawing here is intentionally stark. And that's really the crux of it for him. Hanson is arguing that those ideas from the 1990s are now so far outside the party's mainstream that if you tried to champion them today, you'd be treated like an outcast, a heretic, or worse. Okay, so if the change has been that dramatic, what happened? What caused it? Well, Hanson doesn't point to just one thing. He talks about what he calls three cosmic forces that completely reshaped the entire political landscape. He points to three big things: demography, globalization, and institutional control. So let's take a quick look at how he says each one played a part in this whole transformation.
First up, demography. Hanson points to this number, 53 million. That's the number of foreign-born residents in the U.S., which is a historic high. He argues this created a huge new voting bloc that expanded what he called the oppressed class, a new base that could be won over with promises of government aid and entitlements.
Second, globalization. The way Hanson sees it, this basically split America in two. On one side, you had this super wealthy, globalized elite on the coasts, think tech, finance, media, whose focus was now international. And on the other side, you had the traditional middle class in the middle of the country, who, in his words, felt outsourced and left behind as their jobs in manufacturing and farming just disappeared. And the third force is what he calls institutional control. Hanson makes the case that what he terms a monopoly on left-wing knowledge took hold across all the big institutions that shape our culture. He points to legacy media, social media, universities, corporate boardrooms, even professional sports, arguing they all started singing from the same hymn sheet, reinforcing this new progressive ideology.
So you take those three massive forces, demography, globalization, institutional control, and you put them all together, what do you get? Well, according to Hanson, you get a completely new kind of political coalition, one he describes as being shaped like a pyramid.
All right, so at the very, very top of this pyramid, Hanson places the super affluent coastal elites. He sees them as the leaders in tech, finance, and media, who provide the party's funding and whose globalist perspective really shapes its entire agenda.
Now, here's what's maybe the most crucial part of this pyramid. Look at the middle. It's empty. Hanson's core argument is that the party just completely abandoned its traditional base. You know, the white, working, union member middle class.
And then, holding the whole thing up, you have the base of the pyramid. Hanson describes this as a big, new coalition made up of the poor, immigrants, and people who align with the DEI agenda. He argues they're all united by a shared reliance on government support and this common identification with the oppressed narrative.
And for Hanson, it wasn't just that the party left this middle class behind. He argues they actually started to despise them. He lists all these disparaging terms to make his point that the party's former base is now looked at with, open contempt.
So let's just pull this all together. Hanson's thesis is that these huge forces, demography, globalization, and institutional control, created a brand new, revolutionary Democratic Party. A party structured like a pyramid, with the very rich on top, a large dependent class at the bottom, and that traditional middle class just gone. Now, it's a controversial argument for sure, and it leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. If forces this powerful can so radically reshape one party, what other unseen pressures might be transforming all of our political parties right now?